September 4th, out of nowhere, the football world is rocked by a shock announcement. Daniel Levy, the legendary figure at the heart of Tottenham Hotspur, is leaving the club.
For the players, for the staff, and even for Levy himself, it comes as a total surprise.
Because this isn't a graceful retirement, no farewell speeches, no golden handshake. It's a dismissal, swift and silent, orchestrated by the club's majority owners just hours before the news went public. And within a day of the statement, the air over North London starts to feel heavier.
Something's coming.
Two massive investor groups are stepping up and declaring their interest in snapping up Spurs. The situation is unfolding so fast, with new twists popping up by the hour, that the club has no choice but to go live and firmly deny any plans to sell. But here's the thing. This bold statement might just be a clever ploy to kick off some serious bidding wars for Spurs and the opening move in a much deeper game, quietly steered by the club's owning family. A game that now involves high-stakes investor battles, stock market pressure, shady insider trading, luxury properties, and dynastic power plays that wouldn't look out of place in succession. And as always,
It all comes down to money. A lot of it.
whatever happens next, one thing's clear. This is the last season of the Tottenham we've all come to know. The pandemic was a moment of truth for the football business. It exposed every weakness and made even the most bulletproof business models look fragile. That's when, for the first time in ages, big players in the game started really thinking hard about their next moves. Sure, revenues have bounced back post-pandemic and TV rights deals keep breaking new records. On paper, football has never looked more profitable. But among owners who've been in the game for years, there's a growing sense of unease. They're spotting signs that the market's overheated, like a bubble ready to burst, and the rules, both economic and political, are shifting faster than ever. In this wild landscape, even the biggest success stories no longer feel like safe bets for the future. Instead, they look like the perfect moment to cash out at the absolute peak.
And then came the trigger.
The forced sale of Chelsea in 2022. Under intense political pressure and a brutal time crunch, Roman Abramovich still managed to exit with a massive payout. It was a wake-up call. Owners realized something big. That club, the one you've held for years, the one you're emotionally tied to, it's also liquid, and in the right moment, it can turn into serious cash, even in a tough market. And from there, the wave started rolling. Ratcliffe's entry at Man United, Liverpool's owners selling off a stake, and Levy's careful public hints about possibly parting with his share. It's all connected, links in the same chain, and we'll get back to those hints in a bit. But first, it's time to meet the family. This is Joe Lewis, a businessman from London. He started out in his family's catering business, but by the 80s, he'd turned that modest outfit, Tavistock Banqueting, into a full-blown international investment powerhouse. He has a daughter, a son, grandkids, nephews.
The classic family structure, nothing special there.
But bloodline aside, old Joe also has something like an illegitimate son in his business empire. In the 90s, Tavistock was growing fast, pouring money into promising sectors. And that's when a young economist named Daniel appeared on the scene. Ambitious, sharp, calculating, with a clear strategic mind. Lewis saw something in him, a perfect protege, someone he could trust with a brand new direction he wanted to seriously invest in. So Tavistock created a separate structure led by Levy, with a clear mission: to buy up controlling stakes in football clubs across Europe. By the end of the decade, ENIC already held majority stakes in 4 different clubs and was in talks to acquire a piece of Swiss side FC Basel. But honestly, these investments looked more like financial experiments. The new company was learning the ropes in an unfamiliar market and making plenty of mistakes along the way. Still, Levy's ambitions went way beyond that. He was convinced. After a few years of testing their model on second-tier clubs and leagues, ENIC needed a strategic asset, a flagship club to take things to the next level. At the time, the Premier League was on the rise, quickly turning into the epicenter of global football business. And Levy understood exactly what kind of potential a top-tier English club could hold, especially one based in the capital. After the 90s recession, London's real estate market began to bounce back fast. By the early 2000s, prices had nearly doubled. The city was becoming a global magnet for investment, and ignoring that trend simply wasn't an option. Daniel had been sitting on this idea for years, waiting for the perfect moment. But first, he had to sell the idea to Joe. This wasn't some small side project. It would demand way bigger investments and a whole new level of focus. After all, it was set to become ENIC's main anchor, the kind of move that would eclipse everything they'd done before. Luckily, convincing Joe didn't seem like a huge hurdle. By then, Lewis had fully relocated to the sunny Bahamas, but owning a major asset back in London, the city where he grew up, carried real prestige and a deep personal meaning for him.
The same went for Levy himself.
He was a lifelong fan of a certain North London club. As a kid, he'd even hop on a bus from the neighboring county just to catch their matches. But here's where Levy's smarts really showed. The head of ENIC didn't pitch the idea to Lewis based on personal sentiment. He pitched it on business logic. Spurs owned their stadium, and more importantly, they controlled a large plot of land in North London. The area around Tottenham wasn't exactly prime real estate, not compared to Arsenal's neighborhood, and definitely not Chelsea's, but that was exactly part of the appeal. Prices hadn't overheated yet, and the potential for long-term growth was still huge. For old Joe, who was already developing resorts and residential projects through other arms of the Tavistock Empire, buying Spurs was never just about football. Sure, he understood that the Premier League was set to grow, and that Hotspur as a brand would gain value and generate more income. But first and foremost, it was about land, and the opportunity to build something much bigger around it. And as time would show, that vision of infrastructure development would end up overshadowing even Daniel Levy's own love for the game. It became the defining project of his life, but he paid a heavy price for it. The matches, the results, the transfers, the trophies, and of course the hopes of the fans all took a back seat. But let's not get too far ahead of ourselves here. Fast forward to 2000, ENIC entered talks to buy a controlling stake in Spurs from Alan Sugar. You know, the same sharp businessman who swooped in during the early 90s to save the club from total bankruptcy. But after a decade, Sugar was done, fed up with the lack of on-field success, the constant heat from fans, and the non-stop media backlash. First, ENIC acquired roughly a third of the club for £22 million. Then, over the next 3 years, they ramped it up to a solid controlling stake, around 85%. That's when Levy stepped into the spotlight as the club's official frontman, while Lewis stayed in the background, playing the quiet investor role. At the time ENIC stepped in, the Premier League's TV contract was worth just over £150 million, and Tottenham was valued at around £60 million. Jump ahead 25 years, and the Premier League's TV revenues have grown nearly tenfold. But Spurs have taken it even further. Forbes ranks them among the top 10 most valuable football clubs in the world, and internally, there's even talk of a £4 billion valuation. Getting to those numbers wasn't easy though. Through it all, Daniel enjoyed unshakable trust from his patron. Lewis gave him total freedom, full carte blanche, to call the shots on everything club-related. Whenever things got dicey or controversial and Levy needed backup, Joe was right there in his corner without micromanaging the day-to-day details. But what went wrong between them? What cost his resignation? Let's start by unpacking those wild 3 days between his exit and the club's bold statement denying any sale. Daniel wasn't just any chairman, he was the longest-serving one in Premier League history. No one had steered a club for that long, so naturally his sudden departure shook the market and caught the attention of potential buyers. Levy has admitted more than once, Tottenham has been looking to sell a portion of the club to bring in fresh capital. In fact, last year, some of those talks got pretty far, but the deal never happened. And the reasons weren't exactly a mystery. Levy's tough negotiating style and his reluctance to give up control. Splitting up the ownership would have made sense for the club, but not for Daniel. This push was coming especially from Joe's kids, Vivian and Charlie, who were starting to step up, learn the ropes, and take on bigger roles in running things. Sure, fresh money from a new investor could pump up the squad, more muscle to compete with the league's elite. But for Levy, that meant waving goodbye to the full control he'd held for years. And honestly, the status quo worked just fine for him, and for the Lewis Sr. too, who still held the final say. He was thrilled with the financials and couldn't care less about the on-pitch drama or what the fans were saying. Now, to be clear, it's not that Levy was deliberately sabotaging the negotiations.
It's just that he dragged them out.
Delay tactics, endless back and forths, minor revisions, structural questions, all the classic tricks of a negotiation pro. Tricks Spurs fans know all too well from transfer windows. And can you even imagine the relief for those potential buyers when word got out they wouldn't have to tangle with this negotiation devil anymore? No wonder two massive investor groups pounced on the opportunity right away. The first bid is being fronted by Amanda Stavely, the same figure who helped broker the Saudi takeover of Newcastle. Arab funds are back in the mix here too. Only this time, it's a blend of Saudi cash plus investments from UAE sheikhs, all funneled through the fund she represents. The second potential buyer is tied to Chinese money. Both groups have formally expressed interest in buying shares, and under UK law, that means filing with the official takeover panel, the regulatory body that oversees all mergers and acquisitions.
And once that happens, it's all public, nothing secret about it.
Once you declare that initial interest, you've got just 1 month to either step up with a real offer or bow out gracefully. If you pull back, you're sidelined. No more talks on that same deal for a full 6 months.
That's exactly what happened with PCP Capital.
They showed early interest, made their intent public, and then backed off without ever making a real offer. They walked before talks even got off the ground. But Firehawk are still in play, and they've got until October 5th to put something concrete on the table. That said, we've heard a crystal clear response straight from Spurs' new leadership. And here's where it gets interesting. That bold club statement, it wasn't just PR, it was a legal obligation under the UK Takeover Code. The key principle here is transparency, because ENIC controls only 85% of the club, and under UK law, any majority shareholder has to formally state their position on a takeover bid, not just to the board, but to all shareholders, no matter how small their stake is.
They need to know what the money man is planning to do, sell his shares or hold the line.
Because that decision will directly impact the value of the remaining 15%. If ENIC is preparing to sell, those minority shareholders might want to adjust their strategy. Some may even start offloading shares into the open market, expecting a buyout, because once a takeover hits, prices usually spike.
And now think about this.
The club hits the market after 25 years under one man, a man known for shutting down deal after deal. And now, with at least 2 formal buyers in play and likely more circling in the background, do you really think they're going to jump at the first offer that comes in and not even try to start a bidding war?
Oh, come on, no chance.
They've just broken free from a quarter-century of tight control. They've assembled a new executive team. They're finally building a real structure, the kind a serious modern club needs, one where everything doesn't depend on one man, no matter how smart or powerful he was. Purely from a business standpoint, Levy might just be the best football executive of the 21st century. When he took over, Spurs weren't even making £50 million a year. Today, they comfortably bring in over £500 million. And more than that, over his 25-year reign, Tottenham became the most profitable club out of the Premier League's Big Six. He's stepping down at a moment when Spurs have the lowest wage-to-revenue ratio in the entire league.
But hold on, every shiny business win has its shadowy flip side.
Instead of building a clear, structured football organization, Levy ran everything through himself. In elite clubs, it's all about specialization and teamwork. You've got an executive or managing director handling day-to-day operations. A sporting director or director of football runs the football side, like transfers and scouting. Then there's a commercial director steering the money-making deals from sponsorships to merch. Each area is led by specialists, and only the biggest strategic decisions go up to the board or ownership level. But for nearly 25 years, Tottenham lived under a completely different model. An unstoppable Daniel Levy was acting as executive director, sporting CEO, and chief financial controller, all at once. He was hands-on in transfer negotiations. He oversaw major construction projects, the stadium, the training ground. He personally managed sponsorship deals and even small-scale commercial initiatives.
At Spurs, every issue became a strategic issue.
Because every issue went through Levy, and that too became a major red flag for potential buyers. Because instead of acquiring a club with a clean, functioning internal structure, they'd be stepping into a one-man show, where everything revolved around a single individual. And if that relationship didn't work out, it could take them years to untangle Daniel's legacy and rebuild the club around a more conventional model.
Who wants that headache? Then you're dropping billions.
For years, Joe Louis's children watched this one-man management style with growing frustration. They believed Levy should focus solely on the business side and stay out of football decisions, because no matter how tireless he was, no one can do it all, especially not when you're deliberately prioritizing one thing over everything else. Yes, business people applauded him for his ultra-efficient wage-to-revenue ratio, but fans saw it differently. To them, Levy had sacrificed footballing ambition for financial discipline, and that's exactly why, in their eyes, the club would never truly compete with the Premier League's elite, always chasing, occasionally getting a shot, but never quite being in the inner circle. And ironically, one of those rare shots came right after the end of Levy's biggest infrastructure project. Just 6 weeks after opening their gleaming new stadium, Spurs reached the Champions League final. And while it already felt like a miracle after beating Ajax, Levy marked the moment by gifting the entire squad commemorative watches. Coming from someone as famously pragmatic as Daniel, the gesture felt unusually emotional. But in the broader context, it didn't read as a push for one last step. It looked more like a quiet thank you, a subtle acknowledgement that history had already been made. Not a message of unfinished business, but a moment of satisfaction. And that difference matters, especially at a club like Tottenham, because unlike Europe's true heavyweights, Spurs never had that built-in winning DNA. They've always been the ambitious outsider,
always just one step away.
Still, that wasn't even Levy's biggest misstep on the road to making Spurs a true top-tier club, because just 6 months later, he would all but kill that chance for good. Spurs entered the 2019-20 season as Champions League finalists, a regular part of the Premier League's top 4, and with a brand new stadium. During preseason, Mauricio Pochettino, the manager who had led them to 3 top 3 finishes in 5 years, and who received no new signings at all ahead of the club's greatest season, made one thing clear:
the squad needed serious reinforcement.
It was time to solidify their place in the elite and take the next step. But unfortunately for the Argentine, Levy's focus was elsewhere. His top priority was repaying the stadium loan as quickly as possible, so he shifted his attention to event planning, making sure the venue was booked and generating revenue year-round. In the end, Spurs ran a super cautious campaign, only picking up a handful of young up-and-coming talents. None of them were top-level, and none of them ever became top-level. The season started badly, and things only got worse from there. The core squad, which desperately needed a refresh, looked worn out from Pochettino's intense methods. The boss himself seemed totally burned out by autumn. At that point, it felt like the club's brass had no choice but to finally splash extra cash and rebuild during the upcoming winter transfer window. But then Levy shocked the entire football world. Just 5 weeks before the transfer window opened, Pochettino was sacked. The official reason: extremely disappointing results.
It was nothing short of mind-blowing.
Under Pochettino, Spurs finally became a team with structure and a clear identity. A well-drilled modern side that consistently finished in the top 4, all on a tight budget. He developed a wave of young talent, and beyond just their performances on the pitch, he also played a huge part in the revenue the club later earned by selling those players on. For Levy's model, he was the perfect manager,
right up until the moment he wanted to take the next step.
Fans, who were never exactly thrilled with the chairman, were now flat-out stunned. And this time, the backlash became far more intense. And behind the scenes, Joe Louis's heirs were watching, not just with frustration, but possibly with their own version of radical disapproval. Still, they remained quiet observers. They had no real influence over how the club was run, and old Joe still had full confidence in his protege. But everything changed in 2022. Joe suddenly found himself at the center of a major criminal case in the US, where he was about to be charged with insider trading. While the American legal system was still preparing its case, the Louis family scrambled to rework their asset structure, digging through paperwork, trying to minimize the potential fallout, which could have included seizure of certain holdings. In the end, Joe made a decisive move. He transferred control of ENIC and by extension Tottenham to a family trust, officially stepping down as the club's person of significant control. And just like that, Vivian and Charles entered the game. Still, they didn't start reshaping the club right away. First, they waited for the legal process to play out. In the end, Joe avoided prison, receiving only a suspended sentence, largely due to his age and health, along with a £50 million fine. Then, in early 2025, the Lewis heirs commissioned a consulting firm to run a performance review, a straightforward study to identify what needed to change to improve results on the pitch. At the same time, they began reshaping the management structure. First came the appointment of an executive chairman, followed by the club's first CEO. A truly historic moment. Tottenham hadn't had a real CEO for the entire 21st century. The new leadership quickly got to work, rebuilding departments, bringing in fresh people, and that's when the overlaps with Levy's role started to become more obvious. His longtime allies were now reporting to other people, and after the club's worst season of the ENIC era, despite winning the Europa League, Levy's closest associate, Donna Maria Cullen, quietly stepped away. So as shocking as that September 4th announcement may have felt at the time, the signs had been there all year. Still, Levy himself didn't seem to believe his time was up, even though many of his old responsibilities were already being mirrored, and in some cases taken over, by new people inside the club. In early August, he gave a long-form interview that felt like a reflection on the era behind him, but it didn't read like a farewell. If anything, it sounded more like someone ready to start fresh. And yet, the reality was clear. None of the structural changes set in motion earlier in the year could be fully completed. Not until the most powerful figure in the club stepped away. Back in June, the new CEO and the longtime chairman had put on a united front. They spoke of collaboration, of working together to lead Spurs into a new era. But true executive power can't be split. There can only be one center of gravity, and eventually it had to shift. This was Tottenham's first match in the post-Levy era, and it couldn't have gone much better. For the first time in 6 years, Spurs beat West Ham convincingly at the London Stadium. Considering that Daniel's dismissal was driven by the family's desire to win more and win brighter, it's hard to imagine a smoother start to this new chapter. If you need one more reminder of just how long Levy was in charge, the winning goal in the Europa League final was scored by Brennan Johnson. He wasn't even born when Levy took over in early 2001. Now, I'm not here to pass final judgment on Levy's legacy, because how that era is remembered will depend entirely on what comes next. The direction this club takes from here will shape everything, and all we can do for now is watch. But here's the real question: what are the Lewis family's long-term intentions for the club? After the trial wrapped up, Joe, now visibly drained, made his final decision. He stepped back from everything, handing over full control of his empire to his children. And while I was working on this video, yet another offer to buy Tottenham landed on their desk. It was rejected outright. But there's something else, something far more important, that we should be paying attention to. Tottenham also ended its relationship with Rothschild Bank, the same group Levy had brought in last year to serve as advisors and intermediaries in talks with potential investors. Back then, ENIC was open to selling a portion of its stake, and by Levy's estimate, the club needed around £400 million in fresh capital to reach the next level and start competing seriously with the Premier League's elite. But the club's new leadership clearly didn't share that assessment. Not long after Levy's departure, reports began circulating about an upcoming £100 million cash injection from the Lewis Family Trust, set to support the next few transfer windows. Which, let's be honest, in today's market barely moves the needle if your goal is true top-tier competitiveness. On the other hand, this might just be a short-term play, one more step in a longer roadmap toward a full sale. By avoiding a partial sale of their stake and instead injecting a modest amount of capital, the Lewis family keeps the club afloat in the short term while quietly continuing to build a proper executive structure. Because in the end, it all comes down to one thing: what kind of offer lands on their desk? And if, in just the first few days of this new era, the club already received 3 serious proposals, that's more than enough reason to wait. Now the priority is to get things in order, climb the table, finally sell the naming rights to the stadium, something Levy couldn't manage in 6 years. And let's not forget, this isn't just another Chelsea case, this is bigger, much bigger. Because Roman Abramovich didn't have a brand new stadium, a modern, multi-purpose arena generating tens of millions in revenue, even without a single Spurs match being played. And strange as it sounds, a future sale might even benefit our old friend Daniel, because over the years he quietly accumulated nearly a third of ENIC's shares, granted to him through long-term loyalty options from the Lewis family. So don't worry, Levy won't be leaving empty-handed. But the younger Lewises might still find a few surprises waiting for them. For 24 years, Tottenham had the ultimate lightning rod, a man who absorbed every bit of criticism and outrage, shielding the real owners from public heat. Now that he's gone, fans won't be looking to Peter Charrington. They won't be blaming the new CEO. They'll be looking directly at the Lewis heirs. And if things go wrong, the real question is, can Vivian and Charlie handle the pressure? Daniel Levy had skin thicker than a T-Rex's. Whether they've got that same armor, we're about to find out. Same goes for their true intentions when it comes to the club.